We have one more storyteller this evening, and um, this storyteller is somebody that I know to be extremely humble, and she won't mention any of the great things she has done. You have to kind of find out about them on your own, or in some way, shape, or form, stumble upon them. I met her, maybe it was maybe it was like a year ago now already. How long was it ago? Yeah, wow, a year ago. Which during the pandemic, I guess time doesn't feel the same, but we met like on a Facebook group, like watching a presentation, and even within the chat, like I don't know, there was like this immediate like we were going back and forth with jokes, not even knowing each other, and from that moment on, it's been like yeah, connecting, chatting, throwing jokes back and forth, meeting on the side of our different groups, and like uh, the fact that she's here in New York, where I am now, is like, oh yes, no, I have a real friend that I've gotten from the pandemic, which is one of the few things that uh, I'm so glad to have, and so I will pass this on to this next storyteller. She's an amazing person, very funny, very accomplished, though you'll never know it. Christina Chiu.
I'm walking around this property with my husband. Uh, we're looking at this white house. It's a very small house. In fact, at some point it was a barn and converted into a farmhouse. And we're doing what typical first time homeowners do that who move up from the city, into the suburbs. Like, oh, look, there's an oak tree. Oh, oak tree. Oh, look. And it has a cherry tree. Wow. Oh, shutters. Wow. And we're loving this little house. It's very cute. And my husband, he's very into this house because, we're thinking of having kids and this is just being practical. I'm not really sold on moving out to the suburbs because I'm a diehard city person, so a little skeptical. But the trees are pretty, and we're inspecting everything, and everything's great. There's a cute little chimney. There's on the side. There's a little fence, and there's deer, and wow, it's a whole new experience, right? And the only thing that kind of bothers me is my neighbor has these little potted plants, and she's got what I call posies, and she's planted these little posies, and posies are like those flowers that look so sweet and innocent, but then you get really suspicious when you see them. They're up to something. That feeling. And so I don't know. There's a posies, whatever. But we get the house, and it's a beautiful house, and I love being there. And I'm a writer, so I sit at my desk every day, and I'm working, and I face that my neighbor's house. It's a big yellow house, and they've been doing all kinds of construction ever since we've moved in. So they're very busy over there. So one day I have a complication with a different neighbor, and I asked my husband, for the survey so I can just figure things out. And I'm looking over the survey and I realize, oh shit, our neighbor has paved over our property. They have made it their driveway. They've built a wall, and that's on our property. And I'm like, oh no. I tell my husband, I'm like, honey, you're not going to believe this. And he's like, oh, damn it. He's like, now we got to get a lawyer. It's going to cost so much money. And I'm like, look, I'm not the one who paved over the property. I mean, I'm just telling you, right? I'm not even the one who wanted to be out here. Like, we're like going back and forth, whatever. But I have to face these people every single day. So I decide that instead of being negative, I'm going to do something positive. I'm going to start visualizing and doing something positive. So I find a quiet place in my house, and every day I visualize the perfect house, my dream house, and it's like a Tudor, right? And it's got like, oh, it has those, slats, and it's stone, and it has those really steep rooftops, and the windows are like leaded and very close together. And I have my idea, but since it's just my dream house and it's just a dream, I'm going to make it filled with light because then that's my perfect dream house. It's impossible because there isn't a tutor in the world with that's light inside. But this is what I'm visualizing. So I grew up in this area, so I end up, going through town that I grew up in, and I bump into my parents' realtor. And she takes one look at me and she says, "I have your house." I'm like, oh, I'm like, she can read my mind. Oh my God, how does she know what I'm thinking? But then I'm like, I think of my husband. I'm like, oh no, no, we're not thinking of moving. And she's like, oh, come on, just take a look. It doesn't cost anything to look. All right, whatever. I have a few minutes. So she drives me up in her little Jaguar up to this house, right? And it's it's the house that I have visualized. It's a Tudor. It has the slats. It has everything, the windows, everything, the front door, everything. And I'm like, this can't be happening, right? She's like, oh, what do you see inside? So I go inside with her, and we're standing in the living room, and the living room is like high cathedral ceilings. There's a stone fireplace. There's a balcony from the second floor. I'm like, oh my God, this is my dream house. And more than that, while I'm standing there, I feel like this is my house. This is our house. So I go home and I'm like, honey, you're not going to believe this. And he's like, hold on there. Hold on. We're not going anywhere. We're staying. We're not moving. And I'm like, no, 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 of course not. And I tell him the whole thing. And I'm like, you should just go look at it. I mean, it doesn't cost anything to look at it, right? So yeah, off he goes. He goes to look at this house, and um, he comes back and he says, that's our house. And I'm like, I told you that was our house. And he's like, all right, all right. So we still have this problem with our old house. We can't put it on the market and sell it with this boundary issue going on, right? So, we deal with lawyers, and $10,000 later, we finally have it all figured out, and we put it on the market, and yay, we get two lawyers to buy the house, and the lawyers know that they can figure out how to change the easement. So I'm like, woo! And so, okay, everything in our new house is absolutely fabulous. I'm in love with our new house, and everything is just perfect until my son starts going to school. And then suddenly, like, he's really good at math and very smart, and he plays violin. So the boys have him pegged for being, kind of like a nerd, right? So they won't throw him the ball during recess, and they won't play with him. And he's so devastated by this that, like, he's like begging for them, please, please throw to me, right? And he's so devastated when they actually do throw him the ball, but he's so nervous that he actually misses it. And he's just like, I don't even want to go to school anymore. I don't want to go. My husband and I get him into hockey, and he ends up playing tier one hockey, but it doesn't change the fact that he's really lonely. So we get this little puppy, and one night in the middle of the night, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. The little puppy's like, I gotta go out. I'm like, oh. So I take the puppy, I race to the front of the house, and I don't even have time to take her to the backyard where we usually go. And we're in the front yard, and she's on the grass, and all of a sudden, the sprinklers go off. And the sprinkler goes off at my neighbor's lawn. And I'm thinking, why is the neighbor's sprinkler on our lawn? And then I'm like, oh my God, it's happening again. But since I know what's going on, I'm like, no one, no one's stopping me now. I call the surveyor, and he comes in, right? And he measures and he puts in those stakes. And, I call my landscaper and I'm like, I explain the situation. I'm like, look, I need you to come. I need you to plant trees all the way to the front of the house and really delineate the boundaries. So, the next day he appears, he's got like a truckload of these huge pine trees. They're like these huge conifers, right? And I'm like, yes, yes. Do you think you can put them in? He's like, no problem. So he starts to dig and whatever, and bang, he hits bedrock. The neighbors, landscapers, are watching him do this, and they're like, sucker, there's no way he's going to be able to do it now. Oh, that sucker. And my guy is really quiet, and he and I start to speak, and I'm like, oh no, now I'm stuck, right? And he's like, don't worry, I'll figure this out. So he goes off to Home Depot. I'm like, what are we gonna do? Next day he appears, he's got a jackhammer, and he jackhammers the whole way up to the front of the property. And the best part, the most tasty, delicious moment, one of the most delicious moments of my life. Before the trees go in, I go over to my neighbor's house and I knock on their door, and she comes to the door and she's all nice and, oh, what's happening? And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my guy is about to put in these trees, and I noticed that your sprinkler is on our property and I don't want it to get destroyed or anything. So you might want to call your guys and get it fixed. Okay? Thank you. Bye. And I go back to my house and I'm like, whoa, like I feel good. And her husband's so angry. He comes out of the house and he takes the stake and he throws it into the street. And I'm just watching him from my window. And I'm thinking, too late, buddy. The trees go in all the way, plunk, 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 all to the front of the house. And it's too late. No one's gonna change my boundary. And it's done.
It's done.
I love that story so much, and the way that you both have like the physical boundary, but also like the boundaries within your life that you're like, you're not going to cross my boundaries. You're not going to take over my property. And I wanted you to talk a bit about the two moments, like the one where you ended up like moving away. And I know for us who were in the group, there was like this really giddy moment for you, and you talked about it briefly with the lawyers. But I remember when you told us how happy you were that they were going to take care of that problem for you, and then moving to the new house, like you taking care of the problem yourself. So I wanted for you to talk a bit about those two different interactions and how that happened for you. Yeah.
So the first time around, I wasn't really clear. Like you don't automatically assume that race is an issue or that it factors into things, right? But so the first time I'm like, just get me out of here, right? And I hate my neighbors, but the fact that these lawyers, I know that they'll be able to like deal with it. I just feel so happy because they'll then they have to actually litigate with this couple and be forced to deal with it, But then the second time around, the surveyor's looking around, and what's so interesting is that there's this moment where he's like, here's the boundary, and I can't, put a string across it, but you can pretty much get the line. And I'm like, it's so weird because this has actually happened to us before. And of course he says, oh yeah, this happens to Asians. And I'm like, I was like, like, oh, what's he saying? And then I'm like, well, excuse me? And he's like, yeah, it's like they think that you're not going to do anything about it. And after that moment, I was like, fuck that. Like, that's not happening. No one's going to redraw the boundary. No one's going to take my property and come into my property and take it. That's never going to happen again. And in some respects, I guess it didn't really just mean boundaries in terms of physical land, but it really translated in my mind into other things, like other things in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And it's so strange, the idea of like the racism that is actually easier is when it's like explicit. Like when you don't know that it's happening, it's like you start battling with yourself within your own mind of like, no, this isn't, it can't be that, and it can't be this. And the moment that it's like in your face is actually a little bit easier to deal with. You're like, oh, now I know what it is. Like we can go to battle. So I like that you had that moment and you were able to like stand your ground of sorts, and how it also kind of paralleled with your son and like the idea of like what it means to be Asian. Like, here are the people thinking you're gonna like, oh, they won't do anything about it. And also at the same time, the people at your son's school who think that he's like this little nerdy kid, he can't play sports. Like if he drops one ball, that becomes like his defining moment, as opposed to like he's probably caught like hundreds of balls. And so really hard to sit with the how it's happening to you and also how it's happening to the next generation. And so I appreciate that you shared both sides of that and not just like your own aspect of the story. I appreciate that you gave a chance for your son to be seen in a way that wasn't based on a single story. So thank you so much, everybody. One more time for Christina Chiu.
Thank you guys. Being here.
Thank you. Awesome job.
Yes.
Great job.
Oh man,